So Jesus speaks a lot in parables, and parables are stories that Jesus uses to tell people a particular truth. And there's this moment where Jesus is around religious leaders, really self-righteous people. He actually says, the scriptures say that Jesus taught this particular parable because there were some that were really confident of their righteousness. And so they're super confident of their own righteousness, and in that confident place, Jesus says, here's a parable for you. So if you are at all self-righteous or confident that you're right and others are wrong, or that your view's right and other views are wrong, this parable might be for you and me. And so he tells this story of these two particular people who come into the temple to pray. The first person who comes in is a Pharisee. And Pharisees were the religious leaders of the day. They were some of the most devout followers of God. They knew everything about God. They knew the right system. They knew all the rules. They followed all the rules. They were the religious leaders of the day. And so he shares about this Pharisee that comes into the temple to pray, like you would. But when he comes in to pray, the scriptures actually say he prayed to himself. That he prayed that God made him not like the other ones, not like everybody who is bad. Thank you, God, that I'm not like the evildoer, that I'm not like the adulterer, that I'm not like the tax collector. He's like, thank you that I'm not like all these other people who are terrible. I'm right, they're wrong. Thank you, God, that you made me right. And what an interesting prayer to pray. Well, while he's praying this prayer, literally praying that he's thanking God that he's not like a tax collector walks into the temple. Pretty awkward, huh? And so this tax collector, though, has his head down, and he goes to the corner, and he gets down on his knees, and he beats his chest. He can't even look up to the heavens because he's like, I'm so messed up. I'm so wrong. See, tax collectors in this day were like the people who extorted money from even their friends. Rome had occupied Jerusalem, and they had this great way of creating dissension in that they would hire people who were Jewish to become tax collectors, and then to go extort their own people's money. And when he would do this, any tax collector would do this, wow, they would become the most hated. Imagine if your neighbor became a tax collector and started extorting money from you. Like they could just walk into your house, take your money, and maybe the tax was 20%, but they could take an extra 10 or 15 or 20 on top of that. And so this tax collector is hated, and he's felt that hatred, and he knows that his greed has driven him to a place that is wholly unhealthy. And he knows he needs something else. So he walks in to the temple, looking down, beating his chest. And what's interesting is Jesus ends the parable and says, all those who exalt themselves, like the Pharisee does, they're going to be humbled. All those who humble themselves are going to be exalted. There's this reality that when you come to God honestly with where you're at, brokenness and all, God can work with that. But God can't work with the Pharisee or a person who's so righteous that they come in and I got it all together, I'm good. God can't work from that place like he can from the place of someone who comes honestly, humbly, authentically. And so for us today, how are we coming into our relationship with God? Are we coming with a mask, pride, self-righteousness? Or are we coming with humility and an understanding that God can do so much more when we are humble? How are you coming into the temple?